You've got the training, you've done all the hard work, and you've passed the exams and assessments. And yet you feel as if you're faking it. You have a secret dread that you might be discovered. Someone might ask you a difficult question, you'll flounder, and everything will fall apart. You'll be like the emperor with no clothes. These kinds of feelings are very common, and they're usually known as imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is described as a cognitive distortion. In other words, it distorts your thoughts, your thinking or cognitions. In this video, I'm going to look at how imposter syndrome happens, the kinds of problems it can cause, why some people have it and other people don't, and I'll also suggest some ways to overcome it if it's happening to you. Imposter syndrome is something that happens to people who are well qualified to carry out their role. They have all the qualifications and the credentials. If someone is working as a doctor, but they have no training, that's not imposter syndrome. In that case, they are actually faking it. Imposter syndrome is when someone has all the credentials for their role, and yet they still feel as if they're faking it. They feel as if they're a fraud, even if they're not. Imposter syndrome is about self-belief, or rather the lack of it. At some stage in the person's life, usually at a very young age, they were given the impression that they were maybe not academically bright or competent. And a part of them took on the message as a truth. It became a learning, hardwired into their psyche. And no matter how well they do in their actual role, they somehow never quite believe that they are really competent. Many of us experience a feeling of imposter syndrome when we first step into a new job or role. Whatever you're doing, whether you're a nurse or a railway conductor or a business manager, it can be difficult to actually see yourself in that role until you've interacted with your first patient or customer or employee. And for some people, it can take quite a bit of time before they really feel comfortable in that new role or position. But that's not really imposter syndrome. That's just new job nerves. Imposter syndrome can persist for years. In fact, praise and accolades can actually make it worse because the person who has it doesn't feel deserving of that praise. They feel unworthy. And it makes them feel even more nervous because they feel that they might be discovered at any moment as a fraud or a faker. And in other cases, imposter syndrome can simmer at an almost subconscious level until some trigger, maybe something someone says or just a facial expression, brings those difficult feelings up to the surface, into consciousness. And that can cause an enormous loss of focus and concentration. The person who has imposter syndrome might then feel that they have to put on a huge act of bravado or overconfidence, because underneath they feel as if they're on the verge of being found out, of being discovered as a fraud. The concept of imposter syndrome was first put forward by two psychologists in 1978, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Eames. They published a paper titled The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention. They used the term imposter phenomenon to describe internal feelings of intellectual phoniness in high-achieving women. At that time, the status of women in the workplace and in academia was a lot lower than it is today. Women who had achieved academic and professional accomplishments often persisted in believing that they were somehow faking it. In other words, they felt like imposters, as if they had absorbed the cultural attitudes from their early lives at a deep subconscious level. Clance and Eames wrote, "The term imposter phenomenon is used to designate an internal experience of intellectual phoniness, which appears to be particularly prevalent and intense among a select sample of high-achieving women." They suggested that early family dynamics and societal sex role stereotyping were significant contributors to the phenomenon. And they added that numerous women graduate students state that their high examination scores are due to luck, to misgrading, or to the faulty judgment of professors. Women professionals in our sample feel over-evaluated by colleagues and administrators. Self-declared imposters fear that eventually some significant person will discover that they are indeed intellectual imposters. There's been a lot more research into imposter syndrome since that original 1978 paper. And according to a systematic review in 2019, imposter syndrome is no longer a phenomenon that affects just women or mainly women. It occurs across genders. And it also seems to be more common among ethnic minorities, according to the research. The findings didn't single out any particular ethnic group or ethnicity, only that it appears to be minority ethnicities that are most affected by imposter syndrome. This could be due to cultural messaging about status or stereotypes that's absorbed at a subconscious level. It might even be that if a person of a particular ethnic group doesn't see other people of the same ethnic background in that particular role that they've taken on, they might feel like a trailblazer. And they might even feel that they are somehow responsible for the way that their race is perceived in that role. Really, it would be more accurate to say that a part of themselves carries that feeling. The rational mind knows that this is a preposterous way to see things. But the subconscious isn't always rational. And this is why I like to view imposter syndrome in terms of parts. For more information about parts, you can look up in internal family systems, or IFS, which is a psychological approach that believes that our personality is made up of a family of parts, that we are all multiple in a way, or that our personalities are all multiple. It's as if we, or our psyche, sometimes fragments, usually at a very early age, when we experience feelings that are traumatic or too difficult to handle at that stage in life. And then a part that carries those difficult feelings, or that difficult feeling, might be exiled by the system, repressed in other words, because we just can't cope with it at that time. And then other parts move in to protect it. In other words, to prevent the difficult feelings from surfacing into the conscious mind. It could be as simple as someone laughing when you told them that what you wanted to be when you grew up. For example, you might have said, "I want to be an interior decorator when I grow up." And maybe a harassed parent said, "Well, you could start by decorating your room." Or, "I thought you were wanting to be an interior decorator. What kind of decoration is this?" I don't always like to lay the blame at the parents' feet. They might have had their traumas too. Maybe someone who had parents who were immigrants might say, "I want to be a TV presenter when I grow up." And maybe one of their parents had a dream of being a television presenter back in the 1970s, but was always told that their English wasn't good enough, or that they didn't have the right look. And so they might try to protect their son or daughter from going through the same pain that they went through by giving out negative messages. They might say, "It's hard for people like us. Do something that's more secure, financially secure." Often such messaging actually gives the person who receives it more resolve to succeed. But there's just that one little part from the past that lies in the subconscious until some sort of trigger occurs and it emerges into full consciousness and starts causing self-doubt and playing on fears. In addition to parts, internal family systems recognises that we all have a self. And this self is like a part that's not really a part. In other words, it's the core of us, and we all have it. Even if you feel that you don't have a self, it is there. but it's often hidden, especially when there's a part driving the show, sitting in the driver's seat. So how do you know whether it's a part that's in the driver's seat or if you're acting from self? One way is to work out whether it has an agenda, because parts have an agenda, whereas the self is like a pool of stillness, of centeredness and calm. It's always there, but it's usually under the surface. So when you feel the inner critic jumping into the driver's seat to take control, or a sense of self-doubt, like, I must be faking it, I'm not good enough for this, that you feel undeserving or unworthy, when those feelings arise, try to remember that you have this unchanging self inside. And first of all, try to send a bit of love to that part, or to those parts that are bringing up that feeling of self-doubt. Or even if it's the inner critic, just say thank you. Thanks for trying to protect me throughout my life, for working so hard to protect me. But please remember that I'm an adult now, and I need to apply a bit of self-energy to this situation. Try to send the parts a bit of love, and at the same time, send yourself a bit of love too, some compassion. Admit that sometimes it's difficult to do that role that you're doing. You're trained for it, and you can do it. But just notice that it does get difficult at times, and that's okay. Notice those difficult feelings, and at the same time, try to notice that you can choose to summon some self-energy. You can try and apply self-energy to the situation. You might be thinking, how can I do all that when I'm in the middle of this crisis, this critical situation, and I need all my focus? I need to act quickly. The best way is to practice. Practice doing this in situations that aren't quite so important. Notice when you start feeling that sense of self-doubt, or when you hear that inner critic's voice. And if you can, just be aware that this is a part of you feeling this way, that it's not the whole picture. So thank that part. Just say thank you for trying to help me. But again, just please remember that I'm an adult now, and I would really appreciate it if you can just step back just now so that I can try and apply some self-energy to the situation. You will find that the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. Sometimes just noticing these internal reactions can make an enormous difference. Because quite often, when we get that feeling of self-doubt, when the inner critic starts to speak up, our initial reaction is to just repress it, to push it away. You think, oh no, not that situation again. Try and shut up those voices. That's when you go into battle with those impulses, with those inner feelings. And in that way, they can steal your focus because you're so busy trying to distract yourself that you forget what you need to be focusing on. You lose your focus on the important things. So instead, even if it seems counterintuitive, try to be at peace with those parts. Send them some love. Allow them to be heard. And remember that these are just part of you, not the whole picture. Take a few gentle breaths and then turn your attention back to the task at hand. So, if you ever have the feeling that you're an imposter in a role that you're actually fully trained to do, try to recognise and remember that this is just a part of you that stepped into the driver's seat, that it's not the whole situation. Practice it again and again and see how it goes. I hope this is helpful.